Well, thank you so much for joining me, Rachael Thomas, Member of Parliament from Lethbridge.
Thank you so much. Nice to be with you, Faytene.
Well, you're back in the grind. You're always in the grind. You're a mom. You got a brand new little baby or a 17-month-old. Amazing. Congrats. And you're working hard in the constituency all throughout the holidays. But now House of Commons is roaring, is back. What does it feel like, Rachael?
Yeah, you know what? We've been back for a few days now, and I think I think there's a mix. I think there's a mix of excitement to be back in the saddle, so to speak, and advocating for Canadians in the House of Commons, having our voices heard on their behalf, and then I think there's also maybe a little bit of maybe a little bit of hesitancy or concern just in terms of what the country is facing, whether it's affordability or, rising crime rates or attack on religious freedoms. I think there's definitely there's a bit of feeling of concern on our side of the House as the official opposition, for sure.
Yeah, and I think that's across the board. Like, what does this new deal with China mean for Canada? How does the Prime Minister go from saying China's the biggest security threat for our nation to now, hey, let's make a deal and bring all these products from China into our nation? There is really a lot right now. And the cost of living thing, I know you've been talking about that on your Facebook. Thank you so much. C9 as well. Have you been hearing a lot from your constituents regarding the whole dynamic around C9?
Yeah, this has definitely been one of the top concerns that I've been listening to constituents about over the holidays. Whether it's them calling my office or coming in and wanting to see me personally or sending an email. Folks are rightly concerned about an infringement on their religious freedoms, their ability to speak about their faith publicly, to hold to sincere beliefs without fear of persecution. People are very concerned about this and certainly want to know that I'm on side with them, which I am. And they want to make sure that the government backs down and actually moves away from this change that they are currently, planning to impose.
Absolutely. I have never seen our network as engaged and mobilized as they have around this issue. And I think it's because of the backdrop of the threat of revocation of charitable status. And then this just a few weeks after. And it just seems to be this theme of the government not being super warm, it feels like, to people of faith. And so C9, the engagement level is just way up there. I'm really glad. We're all really glad that that has been paused for now, but definitely going to be keeping an eye up on it. So thank you for speaking to that and for being such a strong advocate. But that's not the purpose of our so I want to make sure our viewers know what we're here to talk about. So you've got an incredible bill that went to first reading back in September. We're going to talk about that to protect people from sexual predators, which is amazing. You're also leading the Young Christian Leaders Summit, which is going to be taking place in just a few weeks. And so let's start with your bill, though. Bill C-246, the Ending Sentence Reductions for Sexual Predators Act. Tell us about it.
Yeah, thank you so much for asking. It's something that's near and dear to my heart and something that I had heard quite a bit about and of course, just recognized the need for in our country. And that's what prompted me to bring it forward this fall. I was fortunate to be able to bring it forward in September, which is a rarity. There were only 30 members of Parliament that were selected to bring bills forward. And so being one of those 30 is just an incredible honor. My bill is all about stopping discounts for sexual predators and making sure that we find ourselves on the side of victims rather than on the side of criminals. So for far too long in our country, we have ascribed to a system where we grant concurrent sentences when it comes to sexual assault. So an individual can commit sexual assault 1 time, 2 times, 5 times, 9 times, and their sentence is most often served concurrently. Which means that they will serve 1 sentence for those multiple crimes, which in my estimation and in the estimation of many victims and advocacy groups, it just doesn't do justice. It means that the voice of the first victim was heard, that their story mattered, and that there's a penalty to be paid for that. But victims 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. Unfortunately, their story doesn't matter. It doesn't hold weight. There isn't justice paid for what happened to them. And to have a system that operates like that is very concerning, and certainly, I believe, sends the wrong signal to criminals. And just to society in general, in terms of the credibility that we give to victims and their voice in coming forward, and the sincerity with which we want their well-being and their safety looked after. Further to that, I think there's also a lot of concern around just public safety. When someone who commits these multiple crimes is let out after only 18 months, which is often the case, that puts the public at risk, because that individual has already offended against multiple others and is likely to offend again in that scenario. And so this being of great concern, I brought forward a bill that requires consecutive sentencing, which would mean that one sentence would be served after another. So every crime would count, every victim would get justice, and it would send, a much better signal to our system as a whole, to our society as a whole, but certainly to criminals in terms of their conduct.
Well, thank you so much for taking this on. It's this is a gutting conversation, and it's so hard to think about. And thank you for leaning into defending not just one victim, but all the victims. That's really powerful. I want to talk in a minute about where this idea came from, because you obviously could have taken on a lot of bills. But I think it's also important to mention that your bill, the importance of your bill, is accented in the context of the violent porn culture that we see an entire generation being raised in right now, where so many young people have this perception that violence in intimacy is just normal, is just okay. And so repeat offenses are, I would imagine, I haven't seen a study on this, but I would imagine that unless we have strong legislation like this, there could be a trend line of repeat offenses. And so there needs to be strength within our judiciary and our judicial system in regards to this. I couldn't agree more. So thank you. But how did this start for you? Like, did you hear a story? Was it advocate groups that were knocking on your door saying, hey, Rachel, this is something that matters? Would you take it up? Because when you have a PMB, some of our viewers might know this, you can bring a bill on anything. You could have picked any topic. You could have just passed a motion as well. You didn't actually have to do a bill. So why a bill? Why this bill?
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I think in entering politics, issues of justice have always mattered to me. Issues around human rights have always mattered to me. And I've always looked for opportunities to pursue those things as a person in the House of Commons now. When it came to this specific private member's bill, ultimately what it came down to is, for years, I had been meeting with people in my office and hearing their stories and recognizing that justice was not granted. I would listen to other stories of people who wouldn't even approach the justice system because they didn't have faith in it. And so they thought, why share their story? Why go through the pain? Why go through the process? Why expense take on the expense of getting a lawyer if justice wasn't going to be served? And so I heard these things over and over and over again. And some of these scenarios, of course, were, from constituents that maybe I didn't have a deep relationship with, but others of these stories are from my inner circle and those that are loved dearly by me, who have gone through some of these experiences. And so those obviously are quite hard hitting. In terms of my heart and my passion. And so I saw a crack in our justice system. I saw something that desperately needed to be addressed in order to make sure that victims are cared for, that justice is served. And so I took the opportunity to do that. And I think it's important to note that, right now, 95% of those that are impacted by sexual assault don't bother pursuing justice. They don't bother going through the courts. They don't bother going to the police and reporting. And the reason why they don't is because they have this perception that the justice system is weak, that it will be on the side of the criminal, and that ultimately they won't get they won't get the restitution that they're looking for. And so I think that's wrong. I think in Canada, we want to send a very different message. We want victims to come forward. We want them to pursue justice. And ultimately, we want them to be deeply cared for. And that's what my bill is about.
Powerful. So first reading happened in September. Second reading, you said, happened in November, and you have your next hour of debate where you'll be able to speak to your bill in the House of Commons, I believe, in March. Did I get the timelines right there?
Yeah, so for sure, it was introduced in September, and then it was first spoken to in November, and then there will be another opportunity to speak to my bill again in March.
And when will it be voted on to determine whether or not it goes to committee?
Most likely it'll be voted on at the beginning of April.
Okay. And what's the sentiment that you're receiving back from your colleagues on the other side of the House? I'm going to assume that most of your colleagues within the Conservative caucus are on side because you're conservative. So there's a partisan nature to this, but there's also a principled nature to this. So this is just really good bill. But your colleagues on the other side, are they warm to you in this regard?
Yeah, when it comes to the Liberals, I had some really good conversations with them. I was really hoping that they would come on side with this. Unfortunately, at the end of the day, when they spoke to it in November, they did indicate that they would not be supporting this bill. And I was disappointed with that. And ultimately what it comes down to is they feel that consecutive sentencing is too harsh, that it removes hope for the criminal, which I raise issue with. I am not here to instill hope in the criminal. I am here to defend the innocent and make sure that the victim has justice. And I was really hoping that my colleagues would agree with that mission. Unfortunately, that's not the case. And so, there's still a couple of months. Who knows? Maybe minds can be persuaded. But unfortunately, right now, the Liberals are indicating no support.
Yeah, and I'm sure with a few phone calls from our viewers, maybe minds could be persuaded, right? So it's that's what we can do as a movement and as a network here. But I find this also disturbing, particularly against the backdrop of the recent Supreme Court ruling about child pornography.
Yeah.
Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, the recent decision with regards to child pornography, essentially you had two men. They had hundreds of explicit images in their possession, including not just child pornography, but torture. And ultimately there was a challenge put forward to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court decided that a 1-year mandatory minimum sentence for this type of conduct was too much. That to me is unfathomable. And I've heard from many Canadians that that's the case. Certainly many are distraught over that decision that was taken up. I think it sends this really terrible signal to society that children are not more valuable than a criminal, that justice won't be served. And I think these are really dangerous signals to give. Instead, again, we want to find ourselves on the side of the victim. We want to make sure that we're advocating for the innocent and especially young children. And so, my hope is that these things change very, very soon.
Yeah. And it will be people like you and people like us working together.
Absolutely.
As citizens who take action and reach out to our elected officials about these things that will make the change that we need. I'm just gutted by this conversation in light of the fact that we're moms, right? Like both of us. And, I've got a 9 and an 11-year-old, and there probably isn't a woman in Canada that doesn't have some sort of a story. It might not be about sexual assault, but it might be about, being catcalled or being like, we live in this culture where we need to protect women and children and the vulnerable. And this is what good and just societies do. And this is what good and just members of parliament do, like you. Let's talk about how people can back you up. I already mentioned making some phone calls. We always say to our network, the more effort it takes, the more impact it makes. You agree with that? What would be the things that you would be calling upon viewers to do if they are, as we want to support your bill? I'm not going to put an if in there.
Yeah, no, thank you. I really appreciate the question. And Faytene, I love your advocacy. I love the advocacy of your viewers. We talked about C9 earlier. I certainly have heard from many people who have been impacted by your call to action on that. And so thank you. And again, thank you for having a voice once again on my private members bill, advocating for victims. I think certainly the things that can be done would be, reaching out to Liberal members of Parliament, whether it's by phone or by email, but in particular, the Minister of Justice, who is Sean Fraser. And he can be reached at mcu@justice.gc.ca. And I would just encourage people to write him an email. And it really doesn't take much. It's one line. It can be one line that just says, stand up for victims, support, Rachael Thomas's private members bill, and signed off sincerely. That's really all that it takes to make a difference, to have a voice, and to hopefully, change minds.
Yeah. And if I could actually accent that I find shorter emails are actually better. Because like, assistants, if they're getting hammered with, hundreds of emails every day on so many different issues, and they get this huge long email, like the chances of them actually just physically as a human in time to read that. But if you just have that one liner, they're like, okay, I get it. They can log that. They bring it back to you. And also the issue about contacting Minister Fraser, people need to understand that this is really important, because if he changes his tune on this, and if he really warms up to your bill and says, actually, this bill that Mrs. Thomas is bringing forward is pretty great, then that will shift the temperature in the entire Liberal caucus. Would you not agree?
100%. If I win the minister, I win them all. And
the prime minister, or
or the prime minister, sure. But certainly the justice minister, Sean Fraser, that definitely is really the target in terms of making impact.
Okay. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Before we begin to shift here, is there anything else on this bill? How can we be praying for you?
I think ultimately it just comes down to, praying for favor in the House of Commons, praying for wisdom among my colleagues on all sides, praying for the hearts and minds of those that are in positions of influence and decision making. And again, having a voice and making it heard with the Justice Minister. Again, this bill is really about advocating for victims and making sure that they are stood for, making sure that we send a clear message to society that those that are preyed upon will be stood up for, and they will be defended, and justice will be served. And I think that's the right message. That's what we want to send.
Amazing. Has a petition been launched yet for your bill?
No, that's an excellent idea, though. We certainly could pursue that.
Okay. And so could we. So let's do it. I would say more is better when it comes to these types of action opportunities.
For sure.
And thank you so much. Thank you so much for your amazing work on this. And so, by the way, I want to mention this before we shift. Yeah. Follow Rachael, follow you on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. Are you on all the portals if people really want to track with the progress of this?
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook, X, YouTube, you name it.
Okay. We'll put it up here in the lower thirds here as well in terms of the proper spelling of your name, so people can find you easily. Now let's talk about the Young Christian Leaders Summit. This is so cool. What is it? How can people encourage their young people to go?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So every year we host something called the National Prayer Breakfast in Ottawa. This year we have the pleasure of hosting the 60th anniversary, which is just incredible. So 60 years of people coming from across the country, from coast to coast, and praying in the name of Jesus for our country, for our leaders, for our future. And so it's an incredible morning in prayer together. And alongside that, I have the pleasure of organizing something called the Young Christian Leaders Summit. This is an event that extends 3 days, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, March 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. Folks come in on the Sunday evening and stay until the Tuesday afternoon. And it's an opportunity for young people, 18 to 29, who are curious about what it looks like to live out their Christian faith in the public square, to gather together, to learn from those that are maybe a few steps ahead of them in the journey, and to also glean from one another peer to peer and build relationship. And so the goal is, to spend these 3 impactful days together and hopefully grow and be inspired and empowered and equipped to go out and make a difference. I think it's important also just to mention that as a part of the Young Christian Leaders Summit, it does include attendance at the leaders dinner, which is on the Monday night, which brings leaders in from across the country, from church leadership to government leadership to military leadership and media leadership, et cetera. And so that's a really fantastic venue where people of all ages are gathering. And so the young people that are at the summit will be a part of that. And then on the Tuesday morning, March 24th, they will also be a part of the National Prayer Breakfast, which is, again, that event that pulls together people from across the country to pray for our nation and its leaders. So I think it's a really exciting event. I'm super pumped to welcome these young people to Parliament Hill and to give them a bit of a behind the scenes look into what goes on there, and to be able to hear from members of parliament and senators and other leaders who are doing incredible things, whether it's in media or education, government or healthcare. We want to be able to hear from these folks and be inspired by their stories.
Well, it's, in my view, it's exciting and life-changing. Every time that I've seen a young person go to Parliament, engage with our elected officials, be a part of some of these really epic moments. Like we were just speaking to Richard. It looks like you guys are on track for about 1,300 to 1,400 people at the prayer breakfast. Like these are not just little slide events here. Like these are incredible, gala type events, and it can absolutely mark a young person. And so I want to say to those of you that are watching, if there's somebody in your church, in your sphere, a young person that loves God, and they've just been, they've got a heart for Canada. They've got a heart to really make an impact in their generation. This is the type of thing, we send our kids to India, to Pakistan, to Mexico for these mission trips with their youth groups. But this is like one of those types of things where when we invest into our young people, you never know how they will be impacted and who they might become in the decades ahead. So it's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I think you got that totally right. I remember being in my 20s and having these moments of impact that forever changed, the course of my life, really, because there was a decision that was made. And maybe at that time, I didn't know how crucial it was or important it was or how long lasting that decision would be. But all of those little decisions added up and, obviously have led me down a path. And here I am. And I think that's so true. I think the 20s is really, your later teens and your 20s is kind of this magical space where you get to explore, you get to be curious, you get to take courageous action, you get to meet some really neat people at something like this. And really have help in making some decisions that maybe you do know are key right now in this moment, but maybe you don't know how key they are in this moment. But regardless, there is positive impact to be had. And so my hope is that this is just a lovely group of young people who are super curious about what it means to live transformative lives. And I think we're gonna have a good time together. I think I'll just mention quickly too. It is purposely small. So while the prayer breakfast is about 1,300 or 1,400 people, this gathering, this summit is maxed out at about 80. And so it is a smaller event. It is meant to bring people together in an intimate setting where they're able to build relationship with one another and where they're able to have really meaningful interaction with those Christian leaders that are brought in to speak and do panels and engage with them.
Absolutely. Lifelong impact and lifelong friendships. That's what's going to happen in the 72-hour period. It's so exciting. Thank you to you for your leadership and to your incredible team for all the hard work behind the scenes. I know a little bit about event planning, and it's not some parts with 80 young adults. That's amazing. As we begin to land this, Member of Parliament Rachael Thomas from Lethbridge, Alberta, any final words of encouragement or thoughts for our viewers today?
Oh, again, I just want to express my gratitude to you, Faytene, and again to your viewers, those that are that take a participatory role in our country. It is much needed. Those of us that have been called to serve in the House of Commons, we need wisdom. We need wisdom upon wisdom. We need, the Lord to guide our steps. And ultimately, we want to make sure that decisions are put in place that serve our country well, not only in the present, but in the future to come. And that is our responsibility. And so we need a lot of prayer covering to be able to accomplish that mission.
Mm-hmm. Well spoken, like an incredible member of parliament, but also an incredible mom, I constantly, that's my Gatorade. I think about it. And so grateful that we have members of parliament like you who are prayerful and purposeful in everything that you do. Thank you so much. So Chase, Rachael Thomas, member of parliament, down on all of her socials. The National Prayer Breakfast has its own website. We'll put it up here on the lower thirds. The Young Christian Leaders Summit also has its own website. You can get it through the Prayer Breakfast website, but rattle it off for our viewers here right now again.
Sure. It's just youngchristianleaders.ca.
Okay, super easy. We'll put it up on the bottom and look forward to seeing you all in Ottawa, March 22nd to 24th. And let's get behind Bill C-246 and protect victims of sexual violence and harassment. Thank you so much for all you do.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for watching. Again, please like, comment, actually hit that little love emoji. That will help this to be prioritized in the feeds of those who have similar interests to you. And this will help us get this content out far and wide. If you appreciate this content, you appreciate our hard work here at For My Canada, please consider donating as well so that we can stay at it. Just simply swing by formycanada.com. You can sign up for our email list there. You can sign petitions, you can donate, and there are a bunch of other gadgets as well. Thank you so much for watching. The nation goes to those who show up.